Well, hi, everyone, and welcome again to the Musical Innertube. I'm Don Rooney.
And I'm John Timpane. You know, Don's had quite a career in radio and television, where he's been an on-air personality, a news anchor, and even a TV weatherman.
And John has been a college professor. He's written several books, and he's been an editor and features writer at the Philadelphia Inquirer newspaper.
We first teamed up for a radio show in college. On one show, we introduced a soothing musical interlude.
But we stumbled, and it came out Musical Innertube.
And that became the name for this podcast, where we talk with interesting people about their interesting lives, difference makers who've really made a difference.
And today, once again, we're talking with Cory Hutcheson. Cory is a teacher. He is an assistant professor of English at Kutztown University here in Pennsylvania. Also a legend in the field of legends, so to speak. He knows a lot about folklore and that sort of thing. And so we're going to talk to him about the folklore surrounding Thanksgiving. Hi, Cory.
Hey, how's it going, Don? How's it going, John?
Very good. Thank you so much.
Thanksgiving is a uniquely American holiday, although other countries do have, like, there's a Canadian Thanksgiving, but it doesn't have anything to do with ours, right?
Well, yes. So the way that we sort of frame Thanksgiving is pretty uniquely for us. As sort of United Statesians, right? But then, there are, this tradition of like having a day of thanks or a day set aside to sort of do a harvest-based gratitude festival. I mean, like you said, Canada has that. This is very, very common in England as well. They had this, predating us by quite a bit. So this is not an unusual type of thing to have, but we have sort of canonized it into sort of a nationalized holiday, which is a little more unique, I think, in some ways.
I like the story of how it got to be a regular holiday, a national holiday, because although different presidents, for example, I know Washington decreed a day of Thanksgiving back in something like 1789. Between him and Lincoln, different dates were celebrated as Thanksgiving in different states. It's sort of America all the way through, where different religious interests clashed, and even places claiming they were the first ones to have Thanksgiving. So it wasn't until quite late in our history that it got to be centered on this this date, this last Thursday in November, and even that has changed depending on certain things, depending on wartime and stuff like that.
Sure. Yeah. No. Well, and there's been, duking it out over the day. I think it was James Madison that put it in April of all times. Like, I think it was just like the least Thanksgiving-y time of year, it feels like. And it was, dead set in April, which I mean, it's kind of a cruel April Fool's joke, I suppose. Here's your turkey and mashed potatoes at the end of a long winter.
It just seems like he wanted to be mean-spirited or something. Just so I'm going to throw them a curveball, and just,
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, I think he was, working on rebuilding the White House that had been burned.
He was tired of going over the river and through the woods. He just wanted to sit down at a nice beach location. I guess.
Right. Yeah. This just wanted to have a little early summer holiday almost. So, but yeah, you're right. This does kind of move around. It bounces around. We have concepts of like, when is the first Thanksgiving? And, people like to sort of there's this kind of imaginary, pilgrim sitting down with the indigenous tribes of mostly sort of Massachusetts, the Wampanoag and people of that area. And there is a documented celebration. There's actually two documented celebrations, 1621 and 1623 in November, where those colonists and local Wampanoags did sit down and did have a meal together. But then it wasn't as though that suddenly just became an annual tradition. I mean, they skipped it in 1622 entirely. Like we said, James Madison's bouncing it around in the calendar. Washington proclaims this. And it's not really until, like you said, Lincoln kind of solidifies this in 1863. What he's really doing is kind of a political move, is because, the country's so divided, right? And he's saying, like, well, if our nation is this divided, if we're this conflicted, we need something that can pull us together and make us feel grateful for what we do have. And he sort of looks to Thanksgiving and he says, well, what if we make this kind of a national celebration? So he issues a proclamation, I think in October of 1863 saying that we're going to have a day of national Thanksgiving, and he's the one who sort of sets the, like, it's going to be the last Thursday in November. That's what we're going to do. So, I think it's the last Thursday. I think he does third Thursday in November. He's the first one to do that, 'cause
right.
then later, FDR comes in and tries to move it up, make it the last Thursday in November, and retailers get very angry at it.
Well, that's what I was thinking about. That's what I remember from reading about it, is that business leaders who, not to speak too much of the truth in one place, but it's still true that every time a new national holiday is talked about, a lot of business leaders really don't like that, because that's a loss, of time in business. It interrupts commerce. And I think there's been studies talking about how much better the Christmas season is if it starts a week earlier, right? If Black Friday is the third Friday, not the last Friday of November. Sometimes the last Friday of November is the first Friday of December, right? So it's right. Just it becomes one of these things. Again, it's very American, different interests. It's sort of jockeying about it. But I guess so was FDR the one who finally put it where it rests, or did it ping pong around some more?
I mean, FDR at the end of a sort of metaphorical gun barrel from Congress did that, yes, because he had tried in 1940 is when he tried to move it to the last Thursday in November, or he tried to set it up so that it would move back an extra week, basically, and that again had this enormous retailer pushback, this sense of like you said, if you can start the commerce season a little earlier, because this is, the reason it's Black Friday is because this is when retailers get their ledgers in the black, right?
Right.
They stop operating at a loss and finally make profit. And you want to extend that as much as you can. And so then Congress actually in 1941 is what says, no, here's the actual date that we're going to do this. So. And FDR then sort of signs on the dotted line because he does not want to risk the ire of both Congress and the sort of National Retailers Association.
And the Chamber of Commerce, yes.
Yeah, the most American of holidays. You're absolutely right. How much stock, Cory, can we put in that original Thanksgiving's tale? You mentioned earlier the Wampanoags sitting down with the settlers and having a wonderful meal, and everybody's at peace and everybody loves each other. And how long does that last as well?
The idea that there was peace between the colonists and the local tribes is really fraught, because it's not as though there's just one local tribe. So these colonists are coming in and they're having peaceful relationships to some extent with the Wampanoag, but then there are other members kind of up and down the coast of different nations that are much more conflicted. They're having conflicts with, and some of those are also having conflicts with the Wampanoag, because the Wampanoag are having this kind of positive relationship, at least for a while, with the basically the English settlers at that point. But it's also worth remembering, even that quote unquote first Thanksgiving is by no means the first Thanksgiving. There were colonies, in 1578, there was a Newfoundland colony that had a sort of day of Thanksgiving. It was in May, so they would have been in line with Madison War, but they had a sort of big community feast. And then you have, there was a lot of trouble supplying the colonies for a while. Mostly because the colonists were either A, bad farmers, or B, really afraid of what the natives were telling them. Like, no, you can eat this. This is actually, you should probably eat this local food. And so they would have these periods. There's this whole starving time that happened, particularly in places like Jamestown. So when these ships would arrive, that were resupplying them, those would be proclaimed days of Thanksgiving, where everybody would sort of come out and feast and, finally have something to eat that wasn't, basically hardtack and, boiled cabbage for a while,
Mm-hmm.
And so, you have multiple kind of Thanksgivings going on well before the 1620s, when we have this, what we think of as sort of the first Thanksgiving. And that doesn't really last. Like I said, it's kind of two times 1621, 1623, with a big old skip on 1622. And after that, they really don't have that in that colony anymore. If they have them, they're having kind of regular days of Thanksgiving as sort of a religious expression, but
Yes.
not these kind of big communal gatherings that we sort of think of in that mythology of Thanksgiving.
That mythology also holds, if you look at any decorations for Thanksgiving, it's always pilgrims dressed up. So I think that holds more with the settlers in New England than at any other place in America.
I mean, Virginia did for a while insist that they were the first, and again, quintessentially American, right? Fighting over every little thing about it. Yeah, I wanted to ask about turkey.
Uh-huh.
Not everybody has turkey for Thanksgiving, but I think it's still the predominant sort of staple that's eaten. And was it always turkey? Did they eat turkey on the first one? Why is it turkey?
So I mean, turkey would have been likely on the menu. I actually have I have a whole thing, a wonderful little book that has an account of kind of what was actually cooked in what we think of as sort of the quote unquote first Thanksgiving, right? Which would have also been somewhat representative of what was eaten at any of these kind of English colonies. So they had fish, cod, bass, and other fish, as they say. They had waterfowl, a great store of wild turkeys, venison, meal, which would be sort of grain, what they called Indian corn as well. So those are kind of the things that they would have had sort of handy. So turkey is right there. It's right there at the first Thanksgiving, but it's one of so many things that's being prepared. So I guess you could really say that the tradition that's established there is overeating, right?
Right.
Piling the table as heavy as you can and indulging a little bit.
The groaning board, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Open those belt loops a little bit.
A little bit, for sure.
So, I mean, is there a commercial tale to be told about how turkey gets promoted to sort of the star? I'm wondering just how turkey gets pride of place.
I mean, a lot of it has to do with the fact it's an indigenous bird. It's a bird that we have here that they don't actually have, everywhere else, right? This is pretty unique. It's one of the ones that, one of those things that, when we say the first Thanksgiving, we should also note that there were Thanksgiving holidays even among the indigenous tribes. So like they would have, for example, the green corn dance and things like that. The Cherokee had that. And they were cooking these kinds of foods. And like I said earlier, the colonists were very hesitant to eat some of the stuff that the indigenous people were saying, hey, you can eat this. This is really good. Because tomatoes and potatoes were highly suspect when they were first introduced to Europeans, because they're members of the nightshade family. And so they're sitting there going like, oh, those look like they're terrifying. And of course, now, like who wouldn't eat pizza and French fries, right?
Exactly.
But turkey is one of these things that they very, very quickly recognize the sort of culinary value of. They see like this is a large bird that can supply a very full meal, a large meal. It kind of takes the place of a goose.
Right.
The idea of the Christmas goose that you might have in England.
Right.
So they see very, very quickly this is something that works. Turkey also kind of had some national pride underpinning it a little bit. But there's the story, of course, about Ben Franklin wanted to make our national bird the turkey, right? So he was beat out by the eagle, but we could very well have turkeys, on the top of every American flagpole if
right.
he'd had his way. So
right, the Philadelphia Eagles would have their theme song "Fly Turkeys Fly."
Fly turkeys fly. Oh, that would be great. It's so fun.
I think so.
Yeah.
Hey, there were also a lot of other add-ons, a lot of things that we now consider staples of a Thanksgiving dinner probably weren't around back then. Like I'm looking at sweet potatoes. I don't think, were there sweet potatoes in New England at the time?
No, not likely in New England. Honestly, sweet potatoes are they are an indigenous crop of the Americas. So we find them mostly kind of coming up from South America. And by the time Europeans arrived here, they were certainly being propagated in parts of North America, mostly by native tribes. But they probably wouldn't have been readily at the first, these kind of first early English Thanksgivings. And even if they were, again, there was suspicion about these things that the Europeans hadn't really encountered before. So sweet potatoes would have come in a little bit later, but they were honestly a big part of their popularity grows when African captives are stolen from Africa and become slaves in North America. And during that process, some of the indigenous foodways of those African slaves, they look around for kind of what can I find that's going to be like this that we had sort of back there. And they had some very similar things called yams that were growing over in Africa.
Yep.
And the indigenous people sort of showed them, hey, there's this sweet potato, right? And they figure out that they kind of cook the same way. They kind of have a similar texture. They're both kind of sweet. And so they became a very popular staple among African-American people during the time of enslavement, right? It's really largely due to indigenous and African-American people that becomes such a part of our culture.
There's so many interesting things about this. It's a religious holiday to some people. A lot of people go to church on Thanksgiving. But for other people, it's more of almost a celebration of American exceptionalism, if you know what I mean. Sort of a nationalist holiday. And I think probably in this country, it always had a tinge of that we are blessed the way no other country is blessed. And I'm wondering if you have a comment about, the development of that feeling in Thanksgiving.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very strong part of the impulse that sets off this idea of having that first Thanksgiving as sort of a national myth that we build upon, that we sort of say, hey, look, there's this common cultural heritage that we can all, in quotes, of course, all claim, which is this Thanksgiving, right? And of course, the people who are saying like we can all claim this are very much sort of excluding large groups of people in doing that. But they are trying to say like there is, I mean, again, Lincoln is doing this because he wants to see the nation reunited. That really is his aim and his goal throughout his entire presidency is to reunite the nation. And Thanksgiving feels like a way he can do that. So there is this sort of mythologizing of that. And in American exceptionalism, this idea of we're going to sort of celebrate the things that are American. Well, turkey, again, indigenous bird fits into this. The sweet potato, of course, is part of, or at least our sort of continents as well. Pumpkins grow here, right? They grow here in North America. This is where they're really fun. If you look at, I know we finished talking about Halloween last time, but when they were doing Halloween, quote unquote, jack-o'-lanterns over in Ireland, they were turnips. It's not till they're imported here that they say, hey, these pumpkins are a lot roomier and easier to clean up.
They are so much easier to carve.
Way easier to deal with. And
then what do you do with the guts? You make a pie out of it.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And cranberries as well is very, very common here. We have, that's something that grows a sort of native, as a native plant here. So if you look at the menu of what we think of as sort of traditional U.S. Thanksgiving, it's a lot of foods that are based here, right? So there is a sort of sense of like, we are blessed with this bounty. And it's so funny because like there are these records from these kind of early Thanksgiving time periods. Like I said, the starving time, right? John Smith writes about the starving time around Jamestown when it's practically cannibalism. He also wrote these accounts not too far before that about like the bounty of this new land being so much that he could literally get in a boat and go down a river and fish would jump into his boat. There were just so many of them. So it's always been this sort of sense of like, we should be thankful for what we have. And my gosh, look how much we have, sort of a combination of that.
More Thanksgiving fun with Cory in a moment. But first, this soothing musical Innertube.
Cory's latest book is entitled New World Witchery, a trove of North American folk magic. It's one of the most comprehensive collections of witchcraft and folk magic available.
Cory also hosts 2 podcasts. New World Witchery, the same as the title of his book, is about North American folk magic and witchcraft traditions. And Chasing Foxfire is about the ways folklore intersects with medicine, history, art, and popular culture.
Get more information at Cory's website, CoryThomasHutcheson.com. That's CoryThomasHutcheson.com.
And now, back to this podcast, The Musical Innertube. John had talked earlier about how there are religious connections to it, but I also think that, and again, I can understand how somebody would want to put a Thanksgiving in the spring because part of the whole Thanksgiving story is we're thankful for surviving another hard winter. And then that would put Thanksgiving logically at spring. But also, I think the reason it's where it is because it's at the end of the harvest. And I think there's a lot of harvest festival mixed in with this. Is that right?
There is indeed, yes. To the point where so there was an existing festival, particularly among groups like the Pennsylvania Germans, right, which is kind of where I'm nestled right here. There was an existing festival called Harvest Home, where they literally would dress the church. They would put up decorations all around the church, and everybody would come together for what was essentially a potluck dinner, right? A very big communal celebration. And for a little while, particularly during the 1800s, that was really the more popular thing. That was really what people focused on. They would have these kind of local harvest home celebrations where each kind of area could connect to its own harvest season, its own harvest cycle, and its own harvest festival. And so because of that harvest festival is really, really, it's much more popular until this sort of need for national unity drives this idea of, well, we should unify this, make this a uniform holiday. And Thanksgiving then sort of replaces it. It's at sort of the national level, removing these kind of localized harvest home celebrations. Although we do still have harvest home celebrations, although now instead of having them at churches, we tend to have them at schools of all things. So I think that's an interesting transition.
And can you explain that? So so it'll be something perhaps that a school class will celebrate because, or a whole school might celebrate together, sort of as an observance of an older tradition.
To some extent, yeah. I mean, basically these wind up being like the school fairs that you have in the autumn, where they'll do this sort of carnivals, right? They'll have like a little carnival for the school to do as a fundraiser, right? And they'll have baked goods that are for sale. Sometimes they'll be selling stuff, in a very that traditional American spirit. They'll be selling the Christmas ornaments that the kids make, and they don't do that quite as much anymore. But like for a good while, kids were making things that then you would go buy and you'd put on your tree. At these kind of harvest festivals, why did it move to schools? Well, because that's a lot of the place where we're sort of perpetuating the myth of this first Thanksgiving, right? This is children making, the sort of, what's it called? Construction paper, pilgrim hats, right? Or, perhaps not appropriately making the quote unquote Native American headdresses and things like that, or putting on these pageants and things like just doing sort of a recap of that myth of the first Thanksgiving.
You put the hand down on the paper and trace it, and that makes a turkey.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah,
yes.
There you go.
Yeah, and your little tissue paper turkey. And I think we've moved away from that a little bit. I think we've grown a little bit as a society, and we realize, maybe that myth has had its time, and but at the same time, there is still an impetus to have these kind of fall fairs at the schools. So I it's not entirely gone from us.
What we just been talking about is, in the old sort of ways Thanksgiving was depicted, there was kind of this patriarchal, paternalist attitude toward the Indians, in a lot of paintings and a lot of accounts. In fact, it may have been that the Indians were, when they saw us starving, they may have given us food on a lot of occasions.
Oh yes,
they were probably pretty good neighbors, and they were probably, empathetic to the extent that they could be. They probably, if we were starving, they probably were having trouble with themselves. So I'm just thinking that there are aspects to the way the tale is usually told that, as you've just discussed, sort of are now maybe not as woke as all that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting. You mentioned this idea of the indigenous tribes kind of coming and giving food to the colonists, and they really did that very much from the beginning. Like, there's a letter in 1607 from one of the I think his name was Wahunsakok was his name, but they called him Powhatan, right? They called him Chief Powhatan. from him to John Smith about Jamestown, where he's basically saying, stop stealing our food. You keep sending people that are burning our villages and stealing our food. We've been giving this to you for free. Why are you doing this? Right. So even at that point, there's still there's a very clear impulse to not treat the indigenous folks particularly well, even when they're being helpful. And I do think it's interesting that one of the things that sort of happened recently is that we do have Native American Heritage Month and Native American Heritage Day, both sort of surrounding Thanksgiving now, right? So November is Native American Heritage Month. The day after Thanksgiving is usually celebrated not just as Black Friday, but as Native American Heritage Day as well. And it's fascinating that it took until I think it was 2007 or 2008 to get that signed into law. But it that says something that it's taken a long time to get there, but now it does at least seem to be something that people are starting to recognize, like, oh, the myth that we have about the first Thanksgiving maybe glosses over some really important information and some really difficult history. And maybe, just maybe, we can sort of revise that and find
make up for it.
Yeah. And giving indigenous peoples a day or a month is probably not going to undo a lot of the things that have been done, but at least I think that there's this impulse to try something, and it's at least it's a step, right?
And I think you bring up a really fascinating thing about how the same day is going to be where we try to be mindful of First Peoples. And we also rush off to the store at 4:30 a.m. when it opens to be part of the first rush. In other words, it's supposed to be a consumer hemorrhage.
There's criticism about that for sure, where they sort of say, like, you may say it's Native American Heritage Day, it's really Black Friday, and we know that, which is, I think, where the impulse to say, like, Native American Heritage Month. Okay, so at least there's a little more space around this now too. But yeah, Black Friday is interesting too, isn't it? Like, it's very much ingrained in this lore of Thanksgiving, and we have not to put too fine a mythological point on it, but there's all these kind of horror stories about the Black Friday death counter, right? Where people are tracking how many people are killed on Black Fridays, which doesn't really happen anymore. We seem to have gotten past that at least, but there's still violent outbreaks and shoving and squabbling. But with the idea of this sort of, it's almost like the purge,
right?
It's happening in a Walmart.
But it's also this notion that Thanksgiving really begins the Christmas season in a way, doesn't it? It begins the gift giving season, or the gift buying season. So of course but it's also sort of people liking to mark these things off, as we've always done, right? And to say, okay, when does the season start? When is it okay to get a tree? When is it okay to decorate it? When should I have the stuff done? It's sort of like it's almost a holy holiday in itself by now. Black Friday is.
It really is. It's become, if you think of sort of the temple of commerce that we sort of have, right, in the way that we sort of enshrine institutions, like we have the idea of like Wall Street, right? It's just a place, but it has more meaning than that, the way we talk about it. And so, Black Friday also has this almost mythological power where people, retailers as well, are watching Black Friday to see, like, okay, what is this going to predict for the rest of the year, when it's entirely possible that people are, going to continue to buy well through the holiday season. People now sort of start buying much earlier. Black Friday deals come out much, much sooner. You get, advertisements in your email about them. Cyber Monday factors into all this, but we do sort of enshrine this day as a sort of like what our entire economy seems to hinge on, this one sort of pivotal point. And it's a lot of pressure to put on a single day, quite frankly, but we do it.
The thing I'm thinking of, which I think is really it's fascinating, is it is very much, for some people at least, is very much a continuum. Now, I know a lot of people avoid the stores, on that first weekend after Thanksgiving. But a lot of people sort of look forward to it. They think, okay, we're going to have the blowout on Thursday, and then we'll go to the stores. There is this continuum. And so it means that there's something mythic about the stores all opening at once, all inviting us, come on in, it's time. It's it's a different image of the myth of plenty, isn't it?
It is. It's almost the dark twin in some ways, isn't it? Like it's almost this shadow side, and it's funny in some ways, but at the same time, it's also like it's very real in the sense that there's this pressure for everybody to have a perfect Christmas. If you had a Thanksgiving, if you're thankful for something, then you need to go and squander as well. You need to go, spill the spoils of your wallet, right? You use the bounty of your resources for other people to show how well loved you are, right? Or to show how well blessed you've been.
Yes.
And so Black Friday becomes this way of sort of saying, like, I can get the 172-inch flat screen Ultra 4K HD TV for $29.99 as long as I buy this, literal keg of cheese puffs to go with it or something.
Yes, right. So, it's conspicuous consumption along with conspicuous hospitality.
It is. There really is an element of that to it, for sure.
As we head into the holiday season, have Halloween followed rapidly by Thanksgiving, followed rapidly by Christmas, and then we go through the first part of the year after New Year's, where maybe Valentine's Day is the most, or maybe St. Patrick's Day is about the most impressive holiday that we can come up with until we get back into the spring. So what is the reason for having the holiday season at this particular time of year?
That's a great question, great observation, frankly. So that goes back quite a long ways. We have that sort of going right back into the medieval church, well before that even. The thing is, whatever you're harvesting, if you're in an agrarian society, whatever you're harvesting in October, November, maybe putting up in December, right down to the meats and things like that, you really kind of have to use a lot of that stuff up before the winter really sets in, because only the stuff that you dry, preserve, pickle, smoke, only that stuff is really going to last through the winter. And so because of that, like, this is your last chance to have these really big, fresh food, indulgences. Even to the point where, like, once you get through the holiday season and you get to Fat Tuesday, right, that's when you're using up the last of your sort of lard, right? Because that's about as long as it's going to last. You make your pancakes or your donuts, whatever it is that you make for your pre-Lenten period, because that's the last time that butter and lard are really going to be good for you until the spring comes. So you've got to make it like another 60 days or so, 40 to 60 days before you can have these kind of celebrations again.
I'd love to have a comment about the thing that often happens. Families get together on Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
But we're also supposed to have guests, even perhaps strangers. There was a tradition, and my family did it a couple of times, where we would go and we'd pick up a serviceman and would spend the holiday and maybe the weekend with us, and get all the turkey and beer they want, And I'd love to talk about sort of the place of hospitality and caring for strangers in Thanksgiving.
Yeah, I mean, that I think comes back to the religious component of this, where if you have, you're supposed to share, right? That if you are blessed with bounty, your requirement, the sort of obligation that you are under, is to share that bounty with others. Your family, of course, is part of that, but you really are supposed to share with those who have less. And we'd see a lot of that. There's a lot of impulses to work homeless shelter days around that time, or donate food to shelters to make sure that everybody can have some food at this time of year, which, I mean, I would be very thankful if we were doing that all year round, frankly, but I'm glad that it happens at least at this time of year too. So yeah, there really is this impulse to have a hospitality mindset that goes along with this. And yeah, gathering strangers into your home, this is something where you say, we are opening the doors. We make a space at the table for anybody who's needing this connection, this community. I think what's really funny is that the first place I thought you were going to go with that is this idea of, like, you're gathered with your family. And it just makes me think there's that Saturday Night Live skit with Will Ferrell and the family. They're all angrily eating, and you just hear the silverware like scraping on the plates and stuff, because that's the other that's the sort of the dark twin of that one, right? The sort of a shadow side of the hospitality you're talking about is that there's this sense of like, oh, I have to be with my family and I just hate them, right? Like, I can't stand
every Thanksgiving themed movie there is about going home and hating your family and having fights.
Yes, it's such a strong feeling. And honestly, it's funny because like my favorite Thanksgiving movie is Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, which is much more to the side of like you invite a stranger into your home, and I really find that heartwarming. But you're right, like that's a rare gem among so many of them that are about like everybody's together and how do you drink away the holiday and get out of this alive.
Stay pleasantly drunk so nothing really bad happens, you know.
Yeah. Exactly. So you don't, go off on Aunt Judy for whatever horrible thing that she says,
The position of football in Thanksgiving and its importance.
There's obviously kind of the nature of this as a phenomenon where people sit and watch, and usually it's a college game, right? So it's the sense of seeing the potential of youth in America, right? The future of America, or they'll maybe watch a pro game as well, which sort of fills this gap that And there is this whole American exceptionalism thing I think you see with football as well, where it's sort of the movement of a frontier of people back and forth across a landscape.
Oh, definitely. Oh my God. Yes. I think that, and also I think families do have, turkey bowls, don't they? They go out and they find the muddiest place possible. And they have they have a tag, or maybe not tag football. Maybe, in our house, it was not unusual to have a broken collarbone or two.
Oh yeah,
for Thanksgiving.
Yeah, it's not Thanksgiving unless somebody breaks out the first aid kit, right? Like that's
exactly. And this could all tie in with consumerism too, because television gets into Thanksgiving in a big way. You got the parades all morning, you got football all afternoon, and then you got TV specials at night. So yeah, basically, I think it's all just, you're right, the most American of holidays.
In so many ways, it really does feel like that, doesn't it?
All right. Hey, thanks, Cory, for being with us today and taking us through all the Thanksgiving lore that you're right, most people think isn't there, but really is.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving. Happy Turkey Day to everybody.
Thank you for listening to the Musical Innertube.
You can get in touch with us by email. We're at musicalinnertube, all one word, @gmail.com.
You can follow us on Twitter at @MInnertube, capitalize the M and I.
Our webpage is Musical Innertube, that's musical spelled with 2 A's, .libsyn, that's spelled LIBSYN.com.
The Innertube is available on Amazon Music, Facebook, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio Podcasts, and anywhere you get your podcasts. Like us, why don't you? And give us a good review on any of those platforms.
And as always, thanks to virtual band Car Radio Dog for our theme music.